Discovering Alabama is a production of the Alabama Museum of Natural History.
Deep in the woods, a recent rain finds its way through the forest floor, through leaf and loam, sand and soil, and out over the buried rocks of ages past. Droplets join to form a trickle. Trickles merge to form a stream.
Welcome to Discovering Alabama. Today we're in a part of the state especially rich with woodland streams. Here in the Bankhead National Forest, hundreds of streams form and flow out of a hidden forest region recognized nationally for its pristine wilderness qualities. And from the first trickles to their convergence in scores of beautiful branches and creeks, here too we find the headwaters of a river most prominent in Alabama's development. I'm Doug Phillips. Join me for a trip across the waters and the history of the Black Warrior River. This program is about a land unknown to many people, a land that in many ways has escaped the hustle and bustle of modern civilization, a place with bountiful backcountry, forests, streams, and wildlife more diverse than can be found in much of the inhabited world. Come along with me as we explore the natural wonders of this land. Come along as we discover Alabama.
In many ways, the Black Warrior River has served as a cradle of life. Uncommonly rich in natural resources, the river has provided sustenance to all manner of creature for thousands of years, and its waters have long been witness to the human presence in Alabama, from prehistoric settlements of Aboriginal Indians to the encampments of the first European explorers.
And just as the river had drawn the Indians to the area and the European explorers, it would later draw waves of settlers and eventually become the developed waterway we know today. And down through history, the attraction of the Black Warrior has been tied primarily to the great natural richness of the river system.
The upper reaches of the river's watershed are found among the southern elevations of the Cumberland Plateau and adjoining Appalachian Highlands. This rocky terrain is the setting for three major headwater tributaries of the Black Warrior. The westernmost tributary, the Sipsey Fork, flows from the woodland surrounds of the Bankhead National Forest. The easternmost tributary, the Locust Fork, rushes past high bluffs and frequent shoals along the length of Sand Mountain. The waters of the Sipsey Fork and the Locust Fork join those of the middle tributary, the Mulberry Fork, and wind through farm and forest to form the Black Warrior proper north of Birmingham. The Black Warrior continues through rocky Appalachian terrain until it reaches the town of Tuscaloosa, where it flows into the slower, sandy bends of a very different geological region, the East Gulf Coastal Plain. From here, it meanders through the coastal plain region, joins the Tombigbee and the Alabama rivers at Demopolis, and makes its way on to Mobile Bay and the Gulf.
There's a couple of interesting things about the Warrior River system. First of all, it's one of only two river systems in Alabama that are contained completely within state boundaries, the other being the Cahaba River system to the east of the Warrior. Second thing is that the Warrior River system contains approximately 130 species of fishes. There's little doubt that the Warrior River system played an important role in the location of many prehistoric and Indian cultures in the area. Certainly Moundville located right on the banks of the Warrior River south of Tuscaloosa, was utilized heavily by the Indians.
These are some of the kinds of artifacts that tell archaeologists about that use of the floodplain forest. We have, for example, a spear point that would have been used in hunting game. This is a flint hide scraper used in processing the hides. Over here is a pitted stone used for processing nuts to get the nut meats. And with the advent of agriculture, clearing the floodplain forest became very important, and axes, such as this axe blade, became very important for that. When they began to grow corn, they required a new technology for that, represented by this shell-tempered cooking pot. Here at Mountville, for example, we have the preserved mounds and plaza of a large ceremonial center of Mississippian culture. This culture was agriculturally based. It existed about 1,000 years ago. This vast chiefdom went into decline at some point, and during the 16th century, when De Soto's army marched through this area, he's believed to have passed very near here. At that time, this province was called Paphalaya, and so was the river. In fact, it was one of the greatest chieftains that De Soto encountered, Chief Taskalusa, whose name means Black Warrior, who lent its name to the river, and that name, Black Warrior, has been passed down to us since.
For a century or so following the departure of the Spanish explorers, not much is known about the Black Warrior area. This was a time dubbed the Century of Obscurity. Archaeological evidence indicates little in the way of Indian towns around the river, but suggests the area may have been a common hunting ground for several surrounding tribes that might have been in dispute over ownership of these lands.
By the early colonial period, Aboriginal populations had been totally replaced by a number of distinct tribes, and the Black Warrior was bordered to the north by the Chickasaws, to the east by the Creeks, and to the south and west by the Choctaws. For decades, much of the Black Warrior area served as a buffer zone between tribal antagonisms. Then the Indian prophet Tecumseh urged all to rise up against a common enemy, the white man, and some Creeks were eager to comply.
This area actually was a pivotal point in the Creek War. Mrs. Crawley up in Duck River, Tennessee, was abducted. Some of her children were killed by marauding Creeks and brought down to the spot of present-day Tuscaloosa. These problems led to the Fort Mims massacre, where many were killed. Andrew Jackson calls out for vengeance, and Tennessee volunteers flood into this area and beginning the Creek War. This allows potential settlers a first look at this area, and they find an area that is very desirable for settlement.
The Creek Indian War began in 1813 and ended only a year later with the final victory over the Creeks by Andrew Jackson at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend over on the Tallapoosa River. En route to join Jackson on the Tallapoosa, General John Coffee sought to locate and destroy any Creek settlements in the Black Warrior area. One major Creek settlement was at the mouth of the Sipsey Fork, and Coffee found and burned this settlement. In fact, this Indian town was called Black Warrior Town. The burning of Black Warrior Town was part of the sad and final dislocation of Indians from Alabama. But near the town's ashes, there was an important key to the rebirth of the area.
General Coffee had reached Black Warrior Town by following a primary Indian trail that crossed the river at one of its more accessible points. This trail, known as the Black Warrior Road, was one of several established Indian trails crossing the river.
These crossings were typically at sites that were also suitable for settlements, as was the case for a settlement some ways downriver that became the town of Tuscaloosa.
Because Tuscaloosa develops as an entrepot. In other words, a place where you would take goods, unload them from boat, load them onto vehicular conveyance, and take them inland. This in turn leads to a town being founded here, and in December of 1825, the state legislature decrees that Tuscaloosa will be the state capital. Why? Obviously because it is accessible from North Alabama by road, and it's the innermost port navigable by water.
With Tuscaloosa developing as a regional center for trade and commerce, the Black Warrior was a main route of transportation. Cotton quickly became the primary commercial enterprise in the earliest years of development, and steamboats were the primary means of commercial transport. By 1826, there were 4 steamboat lines traveling regularly between Tuscaloosa and Mobile. This same year, Tuscaloosa became Alabama's state capital, and in 1831, site of the state university.
The importance of this river region increased substantially, but the Black Warrior River became especially significant with the discovery of a mineral that would help spawn the industrial age: coal.
By the 1840s, around 200 individuals were involved in the coal trade in Alabama.
Much of the mining was done with no controls and sometimes haphazardly from exposed coal seams right along the riverbank, like this one here.
Tuscaloosa, that elegant capital of Alabama, came in for a rude awakening in 1847 when the seat of government was removed to Montgomery. Immediately, the town was plunged into economic doldrums. How to get out, that was the problem. They realized that just upriver lay massive amounts of coal and iron ore, but how to get at it?
Above Tuscaloosa at the fall line, the Warrior was crossed several large shoal areas. 2 of the more pronounced shoal areas had a direct impact on inland navigation in the early stages of development. The first of those was at Tuscaloosa. It was called either Tuscaloosa or University Shoals. The length was approximately 2 to 2.5 miles, and the total drop at Tuscaloosa was about 20 feet. In summertime, much of the area at Tuscaloosa could be traversed on foot. People walked between Tuscaloosa and Northport. People drove across the river in wagons. The larger area upstream in the area of Bankhead Lock and Dam was known as Squaw Shoals, a series of shoals that ran for about 4 miles, and it had a total drop of about 40 feet.
We're still well north of Tuscaloosa on the river. Now, if this upper part of the Black Warrior was so historically impassable to waterway commerce, then obviously something has changed, and apparently it was a big change.
Actually, the importance of the river was recognized during the Civil War, and it drained one of the largest coal and iron deposits in the United States. So in around 1875, the Secretary of War was actually authorized to improve the Warrior and Tombigbee River systems for national defense.
And most importantly, the United States federal government announced that they would build a series of locks and dams to get around the shoals, to get steamboats up past these shoals that were hindering navigation of the river.
A scientific survey of the Black Warrior was completed in 1886 and brought federal support to build a series of huge dams converting the native river into a string of lakes, each passable through these, the locking systems which gradually raise boats from lake to lake on their way upstream and gradually lower them on the way downstream. The Black Warrior was the first river in Alabama to receive such navigational improvements, which today make possible easy travel for a variety of recreational and commercial craft, including coal barge tows of several loaded barges.
Steamboat days was more or less a seasonable, high water type thing. In other words, like in Tuscaloosa, they would haul cotton and various things, and Tuscaloosa was a point as far as you could go at that time. You probably could haul as much in a a barge now, then they can handle a whole boat, you know, at that particular time. And it's just the Warrior River's always been a challenge. It's either dead low, or you get it gets real high. In other words, it's never just stays the same. In other words, you either know it or you don't know it. And the way you learn it is just like young people, myself, and everybody else, that when they run aground, they remembered that. And then you go down there, and over a period of years, you pretty well run over everything. You pretty well figure out where it's at.
The modern waterway we see today would possibly never have been built except for two men, University of Alabama professor Eugene Allen Smith, the geologist who actually conducted the scientific survey of the Black Warrior, and Major Andrew Damrell of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, who convinced the Army's Board of Engineers to pursue the actual river development.
On paper, Damrell's ideas were an engineer's delight, detailing step by step, structure by structure, the designs for a series of locks and dams that would bring dramatic changes to the Black Warrior.
Construction began on the first lock at Tuscaloosa in 1888. This first phase of river development continued for almost 9 years until completion of a third lock at Tuscaloosa. The project provided regular employment for hundreds of local men, many of whom were former slaves. The work was backbreaking, involving some 44,000 cubic yards of stone, which had to be quarried and shaped into massive square blocks, weighing about a ton each. Laborers then had to assemble these blocks into walls for the locks and dams.
The interesting thing about it, though, is that it was a hit and miss process. Appropriations were available some years, not available other years. Much of the original work was done on the shoestring. People were hired from the local surrounding area. They were paid $2 or $3 a day for a wagon, a team of mules, and they worked from basically daylight till dark.
Finally, the historic day came in January 1896 when the steamboat Baltimore traveled up the Black Warrior through the new locks to showcase this early phase of the new waterway. Local folks were thrilled with anticipation. Noted the Tuscaloosa Times on January 15, 1896, already the pulse of Tuscaloosa trade beats faster. By 1915, a total of 17 locks and dams had been completed and renumbered in sequence, from lock number 1 at St. Stephen's, Alabama, up to lock 17 below Birmingham.
My dad worked on the locks with the Corps of Engineers. Raised at Old Lock 8 when we moved down there. Been on the river all my life. The only communications you had with river traffic back then was whistles. When a boat would get close to the lock, well, they'd blow 3 whistles. That would let the lock people know that they were on their way and that they would get up then. Work's changed a lot for the lock master and the lock people. It's become a lot easier in a way. It's a paper shuffle now. When back in the old days it was a strong back.
As the 20th century progressed, the size of the barges traveling the Black Warrior increased dramatically, and the old locks were unable to handle the larger tows. By 1960, the series of 17 locks and dams had been replaced by 6 much larger systems.
When the newer, larger locks were built, most of the older locks were flooded, though portions of old lock number 3 can still be seen here at the University of Alabama campus in Tuscaloosa. Today, the Black Warrior River continues to serve as an important link of commerce connecting Birmingham and Tuscaloosa to Mobile and the world. In recent years, operators of the Warrior Locks have reported as much as 15 million tons of commodities passing down the river in a month's time. In addition to coal, these include a wide array of bulk products vital to Alabama's economy.
But with this commercial success have come a number of less beneficial changes to the river. Coal mining in the Black Warrior watershed has left its mark in several counties. The location of many industries along the river has brought both disruption to the natural surroundings and the direct discharge of industrial waste into the river.
In fairness to the commerce and industry that has developed on the river, a lot has been done to clean up the pollution problems of earlier years. New laws and new industry initiatives have made a big difference. In a lot of respects, water quality today is better than it used to be. But with the human population continuing to increase, our concern today is with a whole new array of accelerating changes in the watershed.
Behind me, you can see a large trash dump. This one and two others located in this area are not legal. They're where people are throwing household garbage from public roads located on the bluff above. It's bad enough that the hillside is being littered, but once the trash comes on down into the waterway, then the water carries it on downstream, and it's deposited all downstream along in the lakes that are formed by locks and dams on down into Tuscaloosa, Demopolis, on down to Mobile.
Well, of course, the biggest impact on the river in the past has been the building of dams. For example, there used to be 17 species of freshwater snails that were found historically, which has been documented from people collecting over the years in the past. And now, recent surveys most people have only been able to come up with about 7 of those 17, and that's just the snails. The same thing can be said for freshwater mussels as well. However, all the various species play a role in the environment. For instance, mussels are filter feeders, and so they actually can remove waste from the water. And with all the mussels disappearing, we're not going to be sure how much waste will continue to be assimilated that we're dumping into the water. And so things like mussels disappearing means that perhaps the ecosystem is getting unhealthy and continues to be getting more unhealthy. Although many people consider dams to be a thing of the past, there are plans now undergoing to construct dams, for instance, in the upper reaches of the Black Warrior system in the Locust Fork. And personally, that's a shame, because that means we're probably going to lose another long, free-flowing stretch of the river system and have just one fewer very unique natural systems that we have in the state.
For thousands of years, the Black Warrior has been a source of life for the lesser creatures that are the fundamental basis of the ecosystem, for those that fill a higher order in nature's web of life, and for us. From the river's cascading headwaters to its broad wetland merger with the Mobile Bay, the Black Warrior is not unlike the Nile, the Ganges, and other great rivers around the world that have supported the growth of human civilization. The earliest human cultures in the southeast were closely intertwined with the living resources of the Black Warrior. As others came here to settle, the native river system continued to sustain human society. For most of that history, use of the river has been in balance, as an economic resource and as an ecological resource.
In the past 100 years, we've taken it upon ourselves to reshape, in many ways to redefine this river system. And we remain dependent upon it today, perhaps in a greater way than ever before. As human society keeps expanding, as change keeps accelerating, the well-being of the river, and ultimately our well-being, will depend on whether our modern use of the river as a commercial resource is kept in balance with its historical role as an environmental resource.
This program is supported by grants from the Alabama Forest Resources Center, promoting education and cooperation for all the benefits of proper forest management. The Alabama Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, State Lands Division. The Alabama Wildlife Federation, working for wildlife since 1935. And Legacy, partners in environmental education.